The church smelled of lilies and expensive cologne. Crystal chandeliers caught the late afternoon light and shattered it across polished marble. Rows of black suits were stitched like a single shadow, folding and unfolding with a hush of practiced grief. Cameras lined the back of the hall, their red lights small, hungry eyes. At the center, a mahogany casket sat open, the billionaire's wife arranged as if sleeping, a pale score of makeup smoothing the life from her face. People talked in soft, rehearsed phrases. She was generous, she was devoted, she will be missed. The billionaire stood beside the casket, a man carved from control, jaw clenched beneath a ring of perfectly trimmed silver. He blinked as condolence cards and bouquets were handed to him like tiny indictments. At the far end of the aisle, near a doorway where ushers guided guests to their seats, a man in tattered layers watched. There was nothing theatrical about him. His coat was a winter-agost color, his shoes asked for mercy. Dirt marked his hands, and a small, faded locket dangled from a chain around his neck, resting against his ribcage like an old promise. He did not belong here, and because he did not belong, everyone assumed he had nothing to say. When he walked forward, the room tightened. Eyes tracked him, curious, annoyed, ready to scold. He moved with the slow, uneven certainty of someone who had learned survival in back alleys and hospital corridors, not in banquet halls. He did not approach the casket. He stopped halfway down the aisle and looked up at the woman in the coffin with the blunt, unromantic way of someone who had known a person in daylight and darkness, in wounds and in laughter. He cleared his throat, a small sound swallowed by the murmured condolence. "She's not dead," he said. The words landed like a dropped glass. A murmur rippled, then a chain reaction. Whispers, a camera swiveling, a woman in velvet gasping as if someone had thrown a match between her and the past. The billionaire's face drained of color, not because of grief, but because the world he had ordered by contracts and secrets suddenly presented a fact he had not bought. Security moved in a practiced blur, broad shoulders and clipped radios. An usher stepped toward the man, voice smooth as paid tribute. "Sir, you can't. She's not dead," he repeated, and there was a steadiness now, an accusation and a memory braided together. He opened his palms like someone offering truth as a gift. The locket gleamed in his hand, and it was the kind of ordinary thing that could break empires. A tiny portrait under glass, hair knotted like a ribbon, a smudge of a laugh caught forever. People remember details when it suits them. They remember the expensive scarf, the gown, the philanthropy speech. They do not remember the way someone's hand shook while making tea, the way they hummed when dressing, the scent of cheap soap mingled with better shampoo. But the homeless man knew the shape of her eyebrows when she frowned at a crossword puzzle. He knew the small scar near her left collarbone from a childhood fall she joked about for years. He knew that when she laughed, her whole body joined the sound. "How do you know?" someone asked, voice small and precise. "Because I saw her," he said. 2 weeks ago. She gave me bread behind the old library. She still had that scar under her collar. She told me to move on when I wanted to follow her to the shelter. She said, 'Don't look for me, Marcus. I have to go where no one will find me.' A name unspooled into the room and hooked like an anchor. Marcus. He rocked on his heels, old habits of balance after sleeping on benches. He spoke with the economy of a man who had said everything he had and could not afford to repeat it. "They told us she died at the hospital," the billionaire said, voice shredded. He took a step forward, then halted because propriety and fury fought each other. "They told me she was gone." "What they told you was convenient," Marcus said. "What they told you was on papers. That does not mean it was true." The cameras panned to the priest, whose hands were still folded as if prayer could stitch a lie. Journalists licked their lips. Somewhere in the back, a voice, soft, almost secret, said, "Who is he?" A woman in the third pew, one of the late-night charity board members who had never met the deceased outside a gala and 2 fundraising lunches, leaned forward and whispered, "He's a homeless man. He's not allowed here." "Let him speak," someone else said, surprising her. The room split. Protect the ceremony or uncover the truth. The billionaire's fingers tightened around a program and whitened. Marcus set his jaw. He had come for one thing only, to make a single, stubborn, human statement in a room sterilized of humanity. He did not want pity or money. He wanted to pull a single thread of truth through fabric that had been stitched by lawyers. "Please," he said, looking at the billionaire, "you remember the ferry across the river? The storm? That night I saw her. She helped me under the bridge. She didn't want anyone to see her with me. She had a way of doing things like that, helping and then disappearing before the thanks could be loud." The billionaire's eyes flashed. "Why would she be with you?" Marcus's laugh was a small, dry thing. "Because she knew what it meant to be invisible." The room exhaled. Silence made space for memory. "She used to volunteer," Marcus said. "She would come to the shelter every Thursday. She'd braid hair for the little girls, write letters with the old men who had never sent one. She handed out blankets like they were treasures because to her they were. One night, after a winter storm, she put me in a taxi and said, 'I can't keep doing this, Marcus. They'll find out. It will ruin everything I've built for good. It will ruin you too if they think you're with me.' She pressed this into my hand." He opened it, and the room leaned in. The locket caught the light again. Inside was a tiny, smiling photograph and a hair the color of rust. "She said she'd write, but she didn't. She said she'd be safe. She wasn't." A journalist in the front, keen for every shred of scandal, raised an eyebrow. "Why would she fake her death?" Marcus's face folded into memories. Maybe she was tired. Maybe she was scared. Maybe she found out something about him. Maybe she knew the only way to leave without being dragged back was to disappear on paper. "I don't know. I only know that when I saw her 2 weeks ago, she was alive. She held a baby then, a small girl with your eyes." He looked straight at the billionaire. "She told me her name wasn't hers anymore. She told me to be gone." At that, a ripple of recognition, like heat from a far-off fire, stole through the billionaire's chest. For a moment the funeral ceased to be a ceremony and became an interrogation. What had the billionaire worked to bury? What bargains had he made in the shadow of his own wealth? The billionaire's voice was low. "You're making claims without proof." Marcus nodded. He had expected that. He lifted his sleeve and tapped the scar near his wrist, a tangle of faded ink and a faint burn. "I'm not the kind of man you believe. But I have this." He touched the locket. "And when I saw her, she had a mark behind her ear from a fever blister she used to get when she was nervous. I saw it. I touched it. I told her it wasn't right, for a woman like her, to move among the broken. She just said, 'Someone has to remember us as people, Marcus, not as problems.'" The priest, obliged now by duty to restore order, cleared his throat. "This service is not the place for. This service is the place for truth," Marcus answered. His voice carried the authority of someone with nothing left to lose. "If she's not dead, then someone swore a false death, and that changes everything. It changes who inherits what. It changes why there were no calls to search for her. It changes how her so-called death became a headline instead of a missing person report." The billionaire's face was a map of decisions, a ledger in human skin. He took a step forward until his polished shoes creaked against the floor. "Who told you to say this? Who put you up to this?" "No one," Marcus said. "I walked here. I stood in line outside and listened to the prayers, and I thought, this is wrong. I thought of the way she rubbed sleep from her eyes and made tea for everyone who came through. I thought of the baby she held when I saw her." He let the last word hang, a small detonator. "If she's alive, then the person in that casket is not who you say she is." A gasp. The cameras swiveled. A woman from the press shoved to the aisle, microphone extended like a probing instrument. "You saw her 2 weeks ago. Where is she now? Can you bring her?" "No," he said. "She told me she couldn't. But she left me this." He thumbed the locket. "And she told me to tell you something if ever she was put in a box. She told me to say, tell them I left because I had to save myself. Tell them I chose a life of hands that hurt and a life of names that aren't mine because it meant I could breathe." The billionaire laughed, a brittle thing that shattered. "My wife would never. You don't get to decide who she was," Marcus said, voice firm now with the righteousness of someone who had watched a person be rewritten to suit a narrative. "You don't get to call it death when it suited you and silence when it didn't. If she chose to live differently, you should be grateful you were never the only thing she was." The silence after that was not a cessation of sound but a rearrangement of priorities. The funeral unfolded into something else. An investigation arm twisted into the edges of the ceremony. Phones began to buzz with messages. A reporter whispered into an earpiece. The billionaire's lawyer, a man whose suits were better than most people's apartments, pulled his client aside, voice low. They spoke in 3 words and thinly veiled curses. The billionaire's control slipped. When he turned back, his eyes had a softness like someone who had been denied the truth for years and finally found its shape. "Prove it," he said, voice hollowing into almost pleading. "Bring me proof. Bring me anything." Marcus looked at the man he had always called Sir when he saw a different face at charity events. He looked at the man who had signed checks that kept the city's shelters painted in better colors, but who never seemed to notice the people inside them. The gap between them was not about money. It was about permission. Marcus had no permission. He had memory. "I can tell you where she used to go," he said. "I can tell you the names of the nurses at the clinic she trusted. I can tell you about the blanket she left folded like an apology on a bench near the river. That's all I have." The billionaire swallowed. His hands trembled. "Then take me there," he said. A sensation moved through the room, somewhere between disbelief and the thrill of a plot bending under pressure. The billionaire's driver got someone on the phone. The funeral that had been meant to seal a life now cracked open like a wound. They left in a graceless convoy, black cars with sirens of privilege and a shabby man with a locket that might be the hinge of the whole story. Cameras spilled into the street, lighting the caravan like a second sunrise. The city watched as a billionaire's funeral turned into a hunt for a woman who had refused the final script.